The massive space station Kepler Prime floated like a crystal jewel against the endless black of space. Two burning suns cast their light across its towering spires, making the entire structure gleam like a beacon in the void. This wasn't just any ordinary station, it was the heart of galactic politics, where decisions that affected billions of lives were made every month. Inside the central chamber, 12 different alien species had gathered for their regular assembly. The room buzzed with nervous energy as creatures of all shapes and sizes took their seats around a massive circular table. Some walked on two legs, others slithered, and a few floated in special atmospheric bubbles that kept them alive in the station's environment. Admiral Keth of the Vorthak Empire was not in a good mood. His reptilian scales shifted from dark green to angry red as he reviewed the reports scattered across his section of the table. The Vorthak were known throughout the galaxy for their military might and short tempers, and today both were on full display. His yellow eyes narrowed as he read through what he considered to be complete nonsense. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, his forked tongue flicking out in annoyance. The other delegates could hear his complaints even from across the massive chamber. Commander Rena of the Centauri Defense Corps sat quietly in her designated spot, watching the various species argue among themselves. Her blue skin had a slight shimmer to it under the artificial lights, and her large silver eyes missed nothing. As head of intelligence for one of the Coalition's most respected defense organizations, she had seen things that would make hardened soldiers wake up screaming. But today's reports were different. They scared her in a way she couldn't quite explain. The chamber fell silent as Admiral Keth suddenly slammed his clawed fist against the metallic table with a loud bang that echoed throughout the room. Several smaller delegates jumped in their seats, and one of the floating gas-based life forms actually changed colors from fear. "These reports are nothing but fantasy," Keth snarled, his voice carrying the deep rumble that all Vorthak possessed. His reptilian features twisted with pure disdain as he gestured wildly at the holographic displays floating above the table. "Humans? They are myths, bedtime stories told to frighten younglings when they refuse to sleep." A few delegates nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The topic of humans had always been a sensitive one in coalition politics. Most species had heard the old stories, tales of a race that had supposedly built the first hyperspace routes and established many of the galaxy's earliest colonies. But those were just legends, weren't they? If these so-called humans ever existed, Keith continued, his voice growing louder with each word, they vanished long ago when their homeworld went silent. Dead and gone, assuming they were ever real to begin with. Commander Rena had heard enough. She stood up slowly, her movements graceful despite the hostile glares being directed her way from around the chamber. Her blue-skinned face remained perfectly calm as she activated her personal holographic projector, filling the air above the table with swirling patterns of light and data. "These readings don't match any known technology in our databases," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of disapproval. The holographic display showed energy signatures that pulsed with an otherworldly glow, patterns that seemed to shift and change even as they watched. "Something is moving through hyperspace, something we've never encountered before." The energy signatures looked almost alive, twisting and flowing like serpents made of pure light. They appeared on sensor readings from 17 different star systems, always at the edge of known space, always disappearing before investigation teams could arrive. The patterns were too complex to be natural phenomena, too organized to be random cosmic events. Ambassador Tix of the Crystalline Dominion leaned forward, his translucent body refracting the holographic light into rainbow patterns. "Even if these readings are real," he said in his musical voice, "why assume they have anything to do with mythical humans? There are thousands of unexplored sectors beyond our borders." "Because the energy signatures match theoretical models we've found in ancient databases," Rena replied, manipulating the hologram to show comparison charts. "Databases that mention human dimensional technology." The chamber erupted in voices as delegates began talking over each other. Some species had always been suspicious of the human legends, believing they were propaganda created by the Coalition's founding members to justify their expansion into supposedly abandoned territories. Others thought the stories were simply entertainment, space folklore that had grown more elaborate with each telling. Admiral Keith's scales had turned an even deeper shade of red. Ghost stories and censor phantoms he dismissed with a wave of his clawed hand. We have real matters to discuss here, trade disputes that are costing us millions of credits, territorial boundaries that need to be redrawn, and resource allocation for the next fiscal cycle. We don't have time for fairy tales about a species that may never have existed. The other delegates began nodding in agreement, eager to move on to more practical matters. The Galactic Coalition had grown comfortable in their established order. Over the centuries, they had their trade routes, their colonies, their carefully balanced power structures. Why rock the boat with stories about mysterious signals from the void? But Commander Rena wasn't ready to give up. She had spent months analyzing these readings, cross-referencing them with every database in Coalition space. The patterns were real and they were getting stronger. Look at the progression, she insisted, changing the holographic display to show a timeline. 6 months ago, we detected faint traces at the edge of the outer rim. 3 months ago, the signals appeared in the neutral zone. Last week, they were detected just 2 jumps from inhabited systems. For a moment, the chamber fell silent as delegates studied the timeline. The progression was undeniable. Whatever was creating these signals was getting closer to Coalition space with each passing month. Then Admiral Keth laughed, a harsh sound that filled the chamber. Probably smugglers with modified engines, or maybe a previously unknown alien species finally developing space travel. The galaxy is full of surprises, Commander, but that doesn't mean we should start believing in ghost stories. As the session moved toward its conclusion, a vote was called to determine the Coalition's response to the mysterious signals. One by one, the delegates cast their votes, and the result was overwhelming. 17 votes to ignore the readings and focus on more pressing matters, with only Commander Rena voting to investigate further. The chamber began to empty as delegates gathered their belongings and prepared to return to their home systems. Admiral Keth strutted past Rena's position, his scales finally returning to their normal green color, now that the nonsense was behind them. Commander Rena gathered her data chips slowly, her silver eyes reflecting the fading holographic displays. Around her, the great chamber grew quiet as the last delegates departed, leaving only the soft hum of the station's life support systems and the distant sound of docking bay operations. In her heart, she knew the Galaxy Coalition had just made their terrible mistake. The readings were real, the patterns were too organized to be natural, and something was definitely approaching from the depths of space. As she walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the empty chamber, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had just ignored the most important warning in galactic history. Far beyond the edge of known space, in dimensions that existed, alongside but separate from normal reality, ancient engines were humming to life after centuries of silence. The exile was ending, and humanity was coming home. Mining colony Epsilon 7 had once been the pride of the Outer Rim territories. For over 30 years, its massive mechanical extractors had worked day and night, pulling rare minerals from the floating rocks of the Kepler asteroid field. The colony housed nearly 3,000 workers from a dozen different species, all united in their mission to harvest the precious resources that powered galactic civilization. Now the colony drifted through space like a ghost ship, its usual bright lights reduced to a dim emergency glow that barely illuminated the massive industrial structures. The communication arrays that normally buzzed with constant chatter had fallen completely silent, leaving only the cold emptiness of space to answer any incoming calls. Captain Nalo of the Coalition Patrol Service had seen plenty of disasters in his 15 years of service. Pirates' attacks, equipment failures, meteor strikes. He thought he had experienced everything the dangerous frontier could throw at him. But as his patrol vessel, the CSS Vigilant, approached the silent mining colony, something felt different about this situation. "Take us in slow," Nalo ordered his pilot, a young Centauri named Kira, whose blue skin had turned pale with worry. "Keep the shields up and weapons ready, just in case." The Vigilant was a sleek patrol cruiser, built for speed and equipped with enough firepower to handle most threats in this sector. Its sensors swept across the colony's structures as they approached, searching for any signs of what might have happened here. "Captain, called Lieutenant Bex from the tactical station, his forearms working multiple control panels simultaneously. "I'm reading structural integrity at 98%. No hull breaches, no weapon damage, no signs of explosion or fire. It's like everyone just disappeared." Through the main viewport, they could see the colony's mining platforms still, attached to several large asteroids, their mechanical arms frozen in mid-operation. Cargo containers floated nearby, their contents spilled into space like scattered jewels against the black void. But there were no bodies, no debris from a struggle, no distress beacons or emergency pods. "Sir," called Communications Officer Yuna from her station, her voice tight with confusion. "I'm detecting life signs in the lower mining shafts, but the main habitat levels are completely empty. It's like the entire population just vanished from the upper sections." Captain Narlo frowned as he studied the sensor readings on his command display. The life signs were weak, but definitely there. Maybe 50 or 60 individuals hiding deep within the colony's mining tunnels. But where were the other 3,000 workers? "Dock us at Port 7, he ordered. "Assemble a security team, full environmental suits and heavy weapons. Whatever happened here, I don't want to take any chances." The docking process was eerily quiet. Normally, colony ports buzzed with activity as ships loaded and unloaded cargo. Workers moved between shifts, and automated systems announced arrivals and departures. But Port 7 was completely silent, its massive bay doors opening automatically. As the Vigilant approached, Captain Narlo led a team of 8 security officers through the colony's corridors, their boots echoing loudly in the empty spaces. The habitat levels looked like they had been abandoned in the middle of a normal workday. Meals sat half-finished on tables in the cafeteria, personal belongings were scattered in living quarters, and workstations showed signs of sudden abandonment. "Captain, over here," called Sergeant Kim, a tough human soldier who had served with Narlo for 3 years. She was standing beside an elevator shaft that led down to the mining levels. "The lift car is stuck between floors. Emergency power only." They used portable grav lifts to descend into the colony's lower levels, where the real mining operations took place. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the environment became. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the tunnel walls, and the usual hum of mining equipment had been replaced by an almost oppressive silence. Finally, they found the survivors huddled in the deepest mining chamber, nearly 2 kilometers below the main colony. About 60 workers from various species had barricaded themselves behind mining equipment and portable shelters. They looked terrified, their eyes constantly darting toward the tunnel entrances, as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness. Foreman Jax was among them, a grizzled veteran of frontier mining who had worked dangerous asteroid fields for over 20 years. Narlo had met him several times during routine inspections, and he had always been a tough, no-nonsense type who wasn't easily scared. But now the old miner could barely speak coherently, his hands shaking as he tried to explain what had happened. "They came from nowhere," Jax whispered, his voice barely audible above the soft hum of life support systems. "Ships that weren't quite there, like shadows made real. We couldn't see them properly until they wanted us to." According to the survivors, it had started during the night shift 3 days ago. Workers on the outer platforms had reported strange readings on their sensors, energy signatures that appeared and disappeared without warning. Then the first ships had been spotted, vessels that seemed to bend light around their hulls, making them nearly invisible against the starfield. "They didn't attack us," explained Dr. Meyer, the colony's chief medical officer. Her usually steady hands trembled as she accessed her personal datapad. "That's what made it so terrifying. They just observed, like we were specimens in some kind of experiment." The security footage from the colony's external cameras revealed glimpses of the mysterious vessels. The ships appeared to phase in and out of normal space, their forms shifting and uncertain. Sometimes they looked solid and metallic, other times they seemed to be made of flowing energy or condensed starlight. Their hulls reflected no light, absorbing the glow from nearby stars and making them nearly impossible to track visually. "Look at this section," Dr. Meyer said, highlighting a portion of the recording. "Watch how they move." The ships didn't follow the normal laws of physics that governed every other spacecraft in the galaxy. They accelerated without visible propulsion, turned without thrusters, and occasionally seemed to exist in two places at the same time. Most disturbing of all, they appeared to be studying the colony with the same methodical approach that scientists might use when examining a new species. The beings inside wore some kind of armor, Foreman Jax continued, his voice growing stronger as he forced himself to remember the details. But it wasn't like any technology I've ever seen. It seemed to flow and shift like liquid metal, adapting to their movements. They walked through our facilities like they owned the place, scanning everything with devices that made no sound. The survivors described how the mysterious visitors had moved through the colony with clear purpose, but they never harmed anyone directly. Instead, they seemed to be cataloging the mining operations, studying the equipment, and analyzing the extracted minerals. Some workers reported feeling a strange tingling sensation when the beings looked at them, as if they were being scanned at a molecular level. Then they started taking people, Dr. Meyer said quietly. Not violently, not against their will exactly. They would approach someone, hold up one of their scanning devices, and the person would just follow them like they were in some kind of trance. Over the course of 2 days, nearly 3,000 colonists had walked calmly aboard the mysterious ships, leaving behind their belongings, their families, and their entire lives. The survivors had only escaped because they had been deep in the mining tunnels when the visitations began, and something about the mineral deposits seemed to interfere with the beings' scanning technology. Captain Nalo transmitted an emergency report back to Coalition Command, but he knew it would be difficult to convince his superiors of what he had witnessed. The story sounded impossible. Ships that bent light, beings in flowing armor, mass disappearances without violence or coercion. If he hadn't seen the evidence himself, he would have dismissed it as space hysteria or equipment malfunction. But the evidence was undeniable. The energy signatures were unlike anything in Coalition databases. The security footage showed technology that defied known physics, and 60 terrified survivors all told the same incredible story. As the Vigilant prepared to evacuate the remaining colonists, similar reports began filtering in from other sectors. A scientific research station in the Beta Centauri system had gone dark, with only a handful of researchers found hiding in underground laboratories. A Coalition patrol base near the neutral zone reported mysterious ships that appeared on sensors for minutes at a time before vanishing completely. An agricultural colony in the Outer Rim had lost half its population overnight, with survivors describing the same shadowy vessels and flowing armored beings. Commander Rena's warnings at the Coalition Council no longer seemed like paranoid speculation. Something was indeed out there, watching and waiting, studying the galaxy's inhabitants with the patience of scientists and the technology of gods. The mysterious signals she had detected were just the beginning. Now the beings behind those signals were making direct contact, and their intentions remained completely unknown. As Captain Nalo's ship jumped into hyperspace with the evacuated colonists, he couldn't shake the feeling that they had just witnessed the opening moves of something much larger. The galaxy was about to change forever, and no one was prepared for what was coming next. The moment came without any warning at all. 1 second, the star systems across the Outer Rim were operating normally, cargo ships moving between planets, mining operations extracting resources, patrol vessels conducting routine sweeps. The next second, reality itself seemed to crack open like broken glass. Space twisted and folded in ways that made seasoned pilots feel sick to their stomachs. Dimensional barriers that had existed since the beginning of time suddenly split apart, revealing glimpses of other realities that existed parallel to normal space. Through these tears in the fabric of the universe, massive vessels began to emerge, ships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The human fleet had returned. Admiral Day stood on the bridge of the flagship UES Harmony, his weathered face showing the weight of decades spent preparing for this exact moment. His gray hair was pulled back in a simple military style, and his dark eyes held the kind of intensity that came from a lifetime of fighting impossible battles. Behind him, dozens of crew members worked at control stations that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, technology so advanced that it appeared almost magical. The Harmony itself was a marvel of human engineering, stretching nearly 3 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was made from materials that existed partially in normal space and partially in higher dimensions, giving it a ghostly appearance that shifted and changed depending on the viewing angle. Weapons ports lined its sides, but they weren't the crude energy cannons used by coalition forces. These were reality-bending devices that could strike targets across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Captain Hyun moved between the tactical displays with practiced efficiency, her hands dancing across holographic controls as she monitored the deployment of hundreds of vessels across 17 different star systems. Each ship in the human fleet was a masterpiece of dimensional engineering, capable of existing in multiple realities at once and striking from angles that conventional physics said were impossible. "Fleet deployment complete, Admiral," Captain Hyun reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "All vessels are in position and ready for your command." Through the main viewport, Admiral Day could see coalition forces scrambling to respond to their sudden appearance. Patrol ships were breaking formation and racing toward alert positions. Mining platforms were activating their defensive systems, and emergency broadcasts were flooding all communication channels. The galaxy was in chaos, and they had only just begun. "Sir," called Communications Officer John from his station near the back of the bridge, "Coalition Command is trying to establish contact. They're demanding to know who we are and what our intentions might be." Admiral Day allowed himself a small smile. After centuries of exile, after watching their people survive in dimensions that barely supported human life, after decades of rebuilding their civilization from scattered refugees and half-remembered technologies, the moment of revelation had finally arrived. "Open channels on all frequencies," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of exile and preparation. "Make sure every inhabited world, every space station, every vessel within 100 light-years can receive our transmission." The bridge fell silent as the communication systems activated. Across the human fleet, identical messages began broadcasting simultaneously, reaching every corner of coalition space in a coordinated wave of revelation that would change the galaxy forever. On thousands of worlds, in millions of homes and workplaces, aliens who had lived their entire lives believing humans were nothing more than ancient myths suddenly found themselves staring at something they had never expected to see, a human face filling their screens. Admiral Day looked directly into the camera, his expression calm but determined. When he spoke, his words carried the accumulated pain and anger of an entire species that had been forgotten by history. "I am Admiral Day of the United Earth Fleet," he announced, his voice reaching every corner of coalition space. "Humanity has returned to reclaim what was stolen from us. Your coalition built its prosperity on the bones of our colonies and the ashes of our worlds. For too long, you have lived on stolen ground, harvesting resources from planets we discovered, using technologies we developed, following hyperspace routes we mapped. The time of reckoning has come." The reaction was immediate and electric. On coalition military bases, alarms began blaring as commanders tried to understand what they were facing. On civilian worlds, crowds gathered around public screens to stare at the face of a species they had thought was extinct. On government stations, emergency sessions were called as political leaders struggled to comprehend the implications of humanity's return. Captain Hyun's tactical displays showed coalition warships moving into attack formations, their weapons charging and shields activating. The response was exactly what they had expected: fear, confusion, and immediate aggression from a civilization that had grown comfortable with their version of galactic history. "Coalition forces are taking offensive positions," Captain Hyun reported, her fingers flying across holographic controls as she tracked the movements of hundreds of enemy vessels. "Should we demonstrate our capabilities, Admiral?" Admiral Day nodded grimly. Words alone would not be enough to convince the coalition of humanity's strength. They needed to see what centuries of dimensional research and technological development had accomplished. "Activate the fleet's advanced systems," he ordered. "Show them what we've learned during our exile." Captain Hyun's hands moved to a special control panel that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. As she activated the human fleet's dimensional weapon systems, reality itself began to bend around their ships. The coalition forces opened fire first, launching volleys of energy, beams and missile strikes toward the human vessels. But their attacks passed harmlessly through empty space, as the human ships phased slightly out of normal reality, existing in the spaces between dimensions where conventional weapons couldn't reach them. Then the humans struck back. Weapons that, fired from folded space, struck coalition vessels from impossible angles, bypassing their shields entirely and striking directly at their hulls. Energy beams that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously cut through the strongest armor plating, like it was paper. Missiles that traveled through higher dimensional space appeared inside enemy ships, detonating in engineering sections. Hand command centers with devastating precision. Coalition Admiral Keth, commanding the defense fleet from his flagship Dominator, watched in horror as his most powerful vessels were systematically destroyed by weapons that shouldn't have been able to exist. His shields, designed to stop the most advanced energy attacks known to galactic science, were completely useless against beams that struck from dimensions his sensors couldn't even detect. "How are they doing this?" he roared at his tactical officer, his reptilian features twisted with rage and fear. "Our shields should be stopping everything they throw at us." But there was no answer his crew could give. The human weapons operated on principles that coalition science had never discovered, technologies that had been developed during humanity's long exile in dimensions that barely supported life. While the coalition had grown comfortable and complacent, humans had been forced to evolve or die, pushing the boundaries of physics and dimensional engineering far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. The battle, if it could even be called that, was over in minutes. Coalition forces found themselves completely outmatched by ships that moved like living shadows, striking from angles that geometry said were impossible and defending themselves, with technologies that seemed to violate the basic laws of reality. As the last coalition warship limped away from the battlefield, its shields down and weapons offline, Admiral Day's voice once again filled the communication channels of nearby systems. "This is just the beginning," he announced, his words carrying the promise of much more to come. "We have returned to reclaim our rightful place in this galaxy. Those who stand with us will find mercy. Those who stand against us will learn why humanity was once feared throughout the stars." The galaxy that had forgotten humanity's existence now trembled before ships that moved like living shadows, commanded by a species that had evolved far beyond the limitations of conventional physics and traditional warfare. The myths had returned from their exile in hidden dimensions, and they carried with them the accumulated fury of a people who had been erased from history. The age of coalition dominance was ending, and the age of humanity's return had begun. The coalition's mighty fortress worlds were falling one by one, their supposedly impregnable defenses crumbling like sandcastles before the advancing human fleet. Admiral Keth's reptilian features had turned a sickly yellow color as he watched his Empire's strongholds disappear from the tactical displays. Each defeat came with terrifying efficiency. Human ships would phase into normal space, disable all defensive systems within minutes, and then vanish again before reinforcements could arrive. Desperate diplomatic channels crackled to life across the galaxy as coalition leaders finally realized they were facing something far beyond their understanding. Emergency sessions were called, ambassadors were recalled from distant posts, and for the first time in centuries, the various alien species began working together out of pure survival instinct. Deep within Kepler Prime's massive archives, Commander Rena found herself at the center of a growing resistance movement that had nothing to do with military action. Instead, they were fighting a different kind of war, a battle for historical truth that had been buried under centuries of lies and deliberate forgetting. The archive levels stretched down for kilometers beneath the station's main structure, filled with data crystals, storage devices, and information banks that contained the recorded history of galactic civilization. Most of this information was freely available to researchers and historians, but Rena had discovered that entire sections of the archives were sealed behind security protocols that required the highest levels of coalition clearance. "There," she said, pointing to a massive vault door that hummed with energy shields. According to the access logs, this entire section has been classified for over 400 years. No one has been allowed inside except for a handful of Coalition founding members. Working alongside her was Dr. Yoon, a human historian who had emerged from Admiral Day's fleet specifically to help translate and interpret the ancient records. Unlike the military personnel aboard the human warships, Dr. Yoon wore simple civilian clothes and carried herself with the quiet dignity of a scholar who had spent decades studying fragments of lost history. "The security systems are incredibly sophisticated," Dr. Yoon observed, as she ran her hands over the vault's control panel. "But they weren't designed to keep out someone with human-level understanding of dimensional technology. Using equipment that seemed to exist partially outside normal space, Dr. Yoon carefully bypassed the vault's defenses without triggering any alarms. The massive door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing rows upon rows of data storage units that stretched back into darkness. What they found inside changed everything. The data crystals contained records that painted a completely different picture of galactic history than anything taught in Coalition schools or universities. According to these hidden files, humanity hadn't been a minor species that had mysteriously vanished. They had been the founders of galactic civilization itself. "Look at this," Dr. Yoon breathed, her voice filled with wonder and growing anger, as she accessed file after file of suppressed information. The hyperspace lanes that connect every major star system, they were all mapped and established by human exploration vessels over 800 years ago. The records showed detailed surveys conducted by human ships, complete with navigational data, safety protocols, and maintenance schedules for the hyperspace beacons that still guided modern spacecraft through the dangerous passages between stars. Every major trade route in the galaxy had been pioneered by human explorers who had risked their lives to push into unknown regions of space. The communication networks, the standardized docking procedures, even the basic principles of faster-than-light travel, Dr. Yoon continued, her fingers flying across the holographic displays as she uncovered file after file of damning evidence. All of it originated from human research and development programs. Commander Rena felt sick to her stomach as the true scope of the deception became clear. The Coalition hadn't just conquered human territory, they had stolen human innovations and claimed them as their own. The entire foundation of galactic civilization was built on technologies that humans had developed, tested, and shared freely with other species in the spirit of mutual cooperation. But the worst revelations were yet to come. As Dr. Yoon accessed deeper levels of the classified files, they discovered records of a coordinated campaign that had taken place over several decades. As other alien species had grown stronger and more numerous, they had begun to see humanity not as partners in galactic development, but as competitors for resources and territory. "They planned it all," Commander Rena whispered as she read through communication logs between Coalition founding members. The attacks on human colonies weren't random acts of aggression. They were part of a systematic plan to eliminate human influence throughout the galaxy. The files contained detailed battle plans, resource allocation schedules, and coordination agreements between multiple alien species. They had worked together to identify key human installations, disrupt supply lines, and target civilian populations with devastating effectiveness. Within 50 years, a thriving human civilization that had spanned hundreds of worlds had been reduced to scattered refugee populations hiding in the darkest corners of space. But the physical destruction was only the beginning. The real horror lay in what came next, a deliberate campaign to erase humanity from galactic memory entirely. "Look at these education protocols," Dr. Yoon said, her voice growing cold with anger. For they systematically removed all references to human contributions from textbooks, historical records, and cultural databases. Within a few generations, most species genuinely believed that humans were nothing more than ancient myths. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The Coalition had not only stolen human worlds and technology, they had stolen human legacy itself, convincing entire civilizations that the foundations they stood on had been built by someone else. Captain Jin of the Human Intelligence Corps materialized on Kepler Prime, using dimensional transport technology that made coalition teleportation systems look primitive by comparison. She was a striking figure in her flowing armor that seemed to shift and change like liquid metal, her dark eyes reflecting the cold fury of someone who had spent decades uncovering the truth about her people's fate. Standing before a hastily assembled gathering of coalition leaders in the station's main conference chamber, Captain Jin activated a holographic display that showed the evidence Dr. Yoon and Commander Rena had uncovered in the archives. "You didn't just steal our worlds," she said, her voice carrying the accumulated pain of centuries of exile and suffering. "You stole our legacy, convinced yourselves and your children that we never existed. You built your entire civilization on foundations we laid, using technologies we developed, following paths we carved through the dangerous darkness of space." The coalition delegates sat in stunned silence as the evidence played out before them. Some species representatives looked genuinely shocked, apparently learning for the first time about their ancestors' role in humanity's destruction. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suggesting they had known at least parts of the truth, but had chosen to remain silent. Captain Hyun led a squadron of human destroyers in a desperate assault on the largest Devourer vessel, a construct so massive it had its own gravitational field. Using dimensional torpedoes that exploded in multiple realities simultaneously, they managed to breach the creature's hull and strike at its central control systems. "Target destroyed," Captain Hyun reported, as the massive enemy vessel went dark, its terrible weapons falling silent. "The entire fleet is losing coordination." Without their command ship, the remaining Devourer vessels began to falter. Their perfect formation broke apart as individual ships lost contact with the hive mind, making them vulnerable to concentrated attacks from the combined human coalition fleet. As the last enemy vessel fell silent and drifted into the void, Admiral Day activated communication systems that reached every corner of the galaxy. His image appeared on screens throughout human and coalition space, his weathered face showing the exhaustion of someone who had carried an impossible burden for far too long. "The threat has been ended," he announced, his voice carrying across countless worlds. "But the old order that allowed such weakness to develop is finished forever. Humanity takes its place in this galaxy, not as conquerors, but as guardians. We will rebuild what was broken, restore what was lost, and ensure that the truth about our shared history is never buried again." The establishment of the Human Protectorate marked the beginning of a new age in galactic civilization. Rather than ruling through force, humans took on the role of protectors and guides, sharing their advanced technology freely while helping other species develop their own capabilities. Commander Rena became the first non-human ambassador to the restored Human Protectorate, working tirelessly to establish a new galactic government built on cooperation rather than exploitation. The species that had once dismissed humans as myths now looked to them as protectors and teachers, finally understanding that some legends exist because they represent the greatest truths of all. In the depths of space, human patrol vessels continued their eternal watch, monitoring the void between galaxies for signs of new threats while nurturing the civilization they had helped create so long ago. The galaxy had learned that some enemies come from beyond the stars, and that the greatest strength comes not from conquest, but from unity in the face of impossible odds. The age of myths and legends was over. The age of truth and cooperation had begun, with humanity standing guard over a galaxy that finally understood the price of forgetting those who had built the foundations of their civilization. The end.